Hello and welcome to Tech Lessons with Alvin. In today's class, we'll be continuing the previous lecture on the OSI model. Having grasped the basics, we are now moving on to understanding the key elements of the OSI model, commonly known as the layers. Now there are 7 of these layers. You have the physical, the data link, network, transport, session, presentation, and application layer. I've heard a lot of teachers expand on these points with so many illustrations. I really do love illustrations. I believe they bring the point home. And I decided to bring a new perspective to understanding this, and I hope it settles well with my listeners. Well, with the OSI model, as we previously discussed, we likened it to the layers in the atmosphere and the soil. One more thing I would like to chip in is that imagine for a moment that humans made soil. So imagine America came up with the whole idea for soil, a mind-blowing concept. This thing, walk on it, plus grow from it. It's just amazing. Imagine America thought of it first. Other countries will also like to keep up with the trend, and so they will also try to make their own soils, right? That is how this whole system looks like. Allow me to explain further. Now, stay with me on the illustration, please. If we had to now invent seeds, engineer seeds, do you think a tomato seed which grows in the soil made by the US will be able to grow in a soil in the United Kingdom? Or will it be able to grow in France? They will all have different ideas of how their soil should look like, feel like, etc., etc. Now, why this point? I'm building up to something. Wikipedia enlightened me upon doing some further reading. It said something pertaining to the network. Turns out the internet we know now wasn't always such a big boy. Back then, the internet was centered around only the United States, and that was the ARPANET. The United Kingdom had their own network infrastructure as well, called the NPL network, and Cyclades, I hope I pronounce it right, Cyclades is the network for the French. You see, it's so different. So imagine I come up with an app, just like the whole tomato seed thing. That would mean my app should be able to operate in the United States network. I'll have to build a different app suited to the environment of the United Kingdom, and yet another app for France. And imagine other countries as well decided to come up with their own soil types and brands. That means a simple app like WhatsApp will have to be created 10, 20 times. But now it's just once. Easy and simple. Why? Because of the unification of all these network rules. Because of the open systems interconnection, the OSI model. So now application developers can have their apps run so many in fact every network in every part of the world. That's really amazing. I just want us to take a minute to appreciate that. Now, on to the main point. We now want to look into the layers of the OSI model. Now, Eli the computer guy was my go-to guy because I had watched an earlier video of his and I loved it. But I, being the unfortunate creative person I am, put myself through the pain of trying to think of it differently, of trying to step away from the shadow and create my own understanding. And that is what I'm here to share with you, and I believe you'll find it as interesting as I do. I thought of the layers and how they relate to each other as a bank. Now, the physical layer, which we know to be the bits, the bytes, the ones and the zeros running through the wires, that physical layer could be the cash money, and the rubber bands for holding the money, and the counting machine in the banks. That's the physical layer. And then we move on to the data link layer. Now, imagine you step into the bank, right? Of course, you go in with your money, your cash, you're holding your money. But you don't just go straight to the teller and give her the money and tell her to put it in your account. Oops. No, it doesn't work like that. You have to fill a form, a cash deposit form. Now, if you're familiar with the process, you already know what that form is. But then let's briefly look at the makeshift form I made from. Good. Now, you can see the screen. There are some details here. Now, if you're familiar with the process, you'll see that not every detail is put here. In fact, this is nothing like the original. And so, think of it this way. You have entered the bank, all right. We have discussed how the physical layer corresponds to the cash and the money counting machines, the rubber bands, etc. The data link layer could be likened to this part of your cash deposit form, the signature. Now, the reason I went with the signature is because the data link layer deals with the MAC address and the address resolution protocol. And that MAC address, as we know, is the unique identifier of the device, the network device in question, be it the switch, the router, or the host machine. So it makes sense that it's the signature on the cash deposit slip, because that is our unique identifier. No one can forge our signature. They may be able to do so, but it will never look the same. Now, we move from the data link layer to the network layer. Now, this layer deals with what? The IP addresses. Now, the IP addresses could be likened to our account number and account name. Our account number is unique. Let's say this is my account number. That is mine. There are no two account numbers out there. And so I have the account number that I am sending the money to, I'm putting the money in. Same way we have the IP address that the data is being routed to. From the network layer, we go to the transport layer. Now, this could be likened to the right section, which deals with the denomination and the amount. Reason being that we are dealing with quantity of data. How much data? And at what rate is the data being transferred? Right? And the data here is broken down. At the transport layer, the data is broken down into segments. That is the heart of the OSI model. And so here you put in the bits. These are just samples. And then we move on to the session layer. Now, the session layer is when everything here has been completed and this slip is handed over to the teller. But take note, you have to form a queue most likely. We anticipate traffic of some sort. Now, this traffic term is a friendly term in the networking field as well, because we also deal with traffic on the network. And so you sit in the queue and then you get your session with the teller, right? The window is always open. You go from the session to the presentation, where you literally present or hand the teller your slip. Now, there's some encryption involved here, in that once you hand the slip and it goes behind the counter, along with the money that you are putting into the account, you don't see it again. You don't know where the money passes. In a sense, that's encryption. And if the reverse were to happen and you were to take out or cash out that amount of money, you won't know where it comes from. All you know is that it has come. That's the decryption aspect of it. The encryption and decryption happens at the presentation layer. And finally, we move on to the application layer. This is quite literal, in the sense that the teller is now interacting directly with the banking software application to complete your transaction. Now, how does this work for us? How do we link this to the actual OSI model? How do we link this to the OSI model? Now we understand the physical, the data link, network, transport, session, presentation, and application in a banking sense. And it is my hope that this has made you, in a sense, be able to tame that wild beast that is the OSI model. Now you don't look at it as this wild and dangerous animal. Now it's tamed and on a leash. You're able to pet it on its head and you are friendly with it. Now we need to get to know it better. And so the physical layer. Now let's enter a bit of detail. Now that layer is the lowest layer. That's the very first layer of the OSI model and is responsible for the actual physical connection between devices. So the information layer, the physical layer contains information in the form of bits, the ones and the zeros. And then we move on to the data link layer, the DLL. Now this is responsible for the delivery of the message from one node to the other. The main function is to make sure that the data transfer is error-free from one node to the other. Now we move on from that data link layer to the network layer. We liken the network layer here to the account number. But then here in the IT world, in the real life, the network layer takes care of the packet routing. The network layer takes care of packet routing. That is, it selects the shortest path to transmit the packet from the number of routes available. Right? So it plots the point. Like in an Uber car, it in a way maps out the journey. Now we move on to the transport layer. The transport layer is layer 4. Now, this layer, we likened it to the money, as you can see on the screen, the denomination side. But then in reality, the data in the transport layer is referred to as segments. And then the transport layer provides acknowledgement of successful data transmission and retransmits the data if an error is found. But what it primarily does is it's responsible for the end-to-end delivery of the complete message. This is the transporter. This makes sure that my money gets to the bank. Now, we move on to the next layer, a session layer. Now, this layer is responsible for the establishment of the connection, the maintenance of sessions, authentication, and also ensures security. Now, think about it this way. Back to the bank scenario. I really like that analogy. Back to the bank analogy. Once you get there and in front of the teller, what happens? You have to provide some form of authentication, right? You have to bring out your ID, be it voters or your national identification. Same thing happens here. There is an authentication, the maintenance of the session, and also security. Now we move on from the session to the presentation. So the presentation layer deals with translation and also encryption or decryption and compression. So the data encryption translates the data into another form of code, presentable to the application layer, and vice versa. And finally, we move on to the application layer. That is at the very top of the OSI reference model. And here, these applications, they produce the data which has to be transferred over the network. And this layer serves as a window for the application services to access the network and for displaying the received information to the user. Now you will notice, if you are very familiar with this, that I haven't mentioned a single protocol. Because especially in the application layer, if you are perhaps sending and receiving mail, you might hear of the simple mail transfer protocol, SMTP, right? or if it's a web page you are viewing, that's the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, the HTTP. Now, this bank analogy could also be a guide to helping us understand the role that protocols play in this OSI model. Now, imagine, right, that in the account number section here, instead of writing it in numbers, I come out here and I spell it out. 6, 3, 2, 1. You see where this is going? This is not the accepted format. This goes against the rule, against the banking protocol. The teller will look at this, might even tear it and tell me to go and do a new one. And she's right, because I'm supposed to put figures there, not words. Same applies to this amount in words. I can't come here and put numbers. No. There are rules. Signature. I can't come here and, I don't know, maybe put a drop of blood. No. There are rules. Syntax rules. Same thing applies to the OSI model. Every layer has a number of protocols, and these protocols ensure the smooth functioning of its respective layer. And so this is my take on the OSI model. This is how best I can understand it, and I hope that it was helpful to you as well. So I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. Thank you, and I hope to see you again on Tech Lessons with Alvin.